Good afternoon and good evening to all of you who have registered from around the globe. To be exact, from Israel, England, the United States, and Canada. I am Mark Mendelson, the Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Associates of Ben-Gurion University, and it is my delight and pleasure and honor to be moderating today's program. I am thrilled that we have once again surpassed our previous webinar Wednesday numbers and have over 120 participants. On behalf of the lay leadership of CABGU and the outstanding staff across Canada, I welcome you and thank you all. Please note that we are also live streaming on Facebook, which is now being very well attended. My staff and I are very proud to be representing what we consider to be Israel's most exciting and unique university. And what better way to illustrate the brilliance of BGU today, but by mentioning the 1-minute breathalyzer test invented by Professor Gabi Sarusi, and which has been featured on all the major TV stations around the world. Ben-Gurion University of the Negev is the fastest growing research university in Israel. With 20,000 students, 4,000 staff and faculty members, and 3 campuses in Beersheba, Sde Boker, and Eilat, BGU is an agent of change, fulfilling the vision of the great David Ben-Gurion, Israel's legendary first prime minister, who envisaged the future of Israel emerging from the Negev. The university is at the heart of Beersheba's transformation into an innovation district, where leading multinational corporations eagerly leverage BGU's expertise to generate innovative art research and development. Now celebrating its 50th year, BGU continues to affect change locally, regionally, and internationally, with faculties in engineering sciences, health sciences, natural sciences, humanities and social sciences, business and management, and desert studies. The university is a recognized national and global leader in many fields, actively encouraging multidisciplinary collaborations with government and industry and nurturing entrepreneurship and innovation in all its forms. BGU is also a university with a conscience, active both on the frontiers of science and in the community. Over 1/3 of our students participate in one of the world's most developed community action programs. Today's webinar, Wednesday, will be a bit different in format. Our very good friend, Connie Putterman from Toronto, an expert in her own right on autism, will be introducing our incredible panel, the leading researchers and clinicians from Israel's National Autism Center at Ben-Gurion University. About a year ago, I spent a few intensive days in Montreal and Toronto with this extraordinary group when they came to Canada, and not only are they brilliant in scholarship and in their field, but they are real mensches. Connie will introduce the team of Ilan, Gal, Idan, and Chava. Each will speak for about 5 to 7 minutes. There are going to be some slides. There's going to be a couple of cute animated little movies. And as in the past, Simon Ben Simon, our Executive Director of Montreal, will be handling the questions, and Zach Ostrov, our Executive Director for Winnipeg, will be our tech specialist. It is now my pleasure to formally introduce Connie. Connie Putterman has been involved in advocacy and advisory roles for the autism research and neurodevelopmental communities in Canada since 2000. She frequently is a guest speaker at autism research conferences and disability and inclusion events in Canada, Israel, and the US. She is the founder and visionary of the Canada-Israel Autism Research Initiative, a private initiative fostering collaborations between Canadian and Israeli autism researchers. She recently completed a Master's of Health Sciences in Translational Research at the University of Toronto's Institute for Medical Studies. She currently facilitates family engagement in research activities for the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto. She lives with her husband, children, and most importantly, her chocolate lab in Toronto. Connie, the mic and screen is all yours.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, for that wonderful introduction. And I'm really honored to be able to introduce this amazing team. And like you said, Mark, they are not only brilliant, but as a team and people, they are individually mensches. So let me first start off really briefly by giving you a little bit of background about them individually. I want to say that I know each of them both professionally and personally. Ilan Dienstein is the director of the National Autism Research Center of Israel. He's an associate professor in psychology and cognitive and brain sciences in the brain sciences department at BGU. He got his PhD from New York University and his postdoctoral training both in Weizmann and at Carnegie Mellon University. Ilan's research really focuses on the neurobiology of autism and with an emphasis on early development. I think that Ilan is, along with the team, has a vision for the National Autism Center to be a world-class international leader of improving autism diagnosis and treatment. Now, Dr. Galme Erie is the clinical director of the National Autism Center, and his background is the child psychiatrist at Soroka University Medical Center, and he's the, as I said, clinical director. He also is an assistant professor at BGU's Faculty of Health Sciences, and he diagnoses about 25% of his conditions that he diagnoses are autism, and he works in and amongst the community, particularly communities in and around the Negev. Idan Menash is also a faculty member in the public health department at BGU, and he studies human genetics and bioinformatics. He had his training in genetic epidemiology at the National Cancer Institute in the US. And finally, Chava is an associate professor in the Department of Physiology and Cell Biology, and she studies neurosciences and mouse models and is very interested in furthering the preclinical work in autism. But all told, what I really want to say about this group is that as a team, they are a force. They have inspiration, insight, and they are really making a difference in autism research in Israel. And they, like my vision, is to see autism research and to value the importance of autism research on the world stage. And what I'd like to say about them is that they have it all together as a group. So I really want you to really value what they are saying and listen carefully, because they have it all together. So take it away, Ilan.
Thank you, Connie. It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you today. And I should send you first a warm hello. It was about 44 degrees Celsius in the shade today in Israel. You shouldn't, you know, we're very envious of Canadian weather at the moment. So what I'd like to do is we'll start with a bit of an overview of the center. I'll tell you a bit about how we became the National Center. We're of course very proud of this. And then we'll go around the table with Idan and Chava and Gal, and we'll give you some examples of the kind of research we do. And the second half of the meeting will be dedicated to our response to the COVID epidemic. And there are two parts to that. One part is how is the support that we've tried to give to parents and families, and the other part is a little bit of research about what the COVID epidemic has, the impact of the epidemic on families who have kids with autism who were, so in Israel, we're now getting back to normal. The education system finally opened up, which was a big sigh of relief for many parents. I understand that in Canada, that's not the case yet. And so we have the opportunity to measure what the closure of all of these systems, what was the impact of that on families with autism. So we'll get there. So what I'll do is I'll share my screen, and we'll go through a couple of slides that we've put together. So the main questions that that we think about on a daily basis at our National Center. I should just mention that the center was opened formally about 2 years ago. We've been working together on autism for much longer than that, but 2 years ago, the Israeli Ministry of Science and Technology finally realized that Israel needs a national autism center. And there was a grant opportunity and we won it. The main effort or the main vision for this center is to facilitate or to create the proper infrastructure in Israel to allow research that would have a direct clinical impact on the way autism is diagnosed and treated in the country. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about specific questions about how we could do things better in Israel in terms of diagnosis and treatment. And when you break down that question, you end up with more specific things that we try to pursue at our center, which have to do with research projects that are targeted at understanding the genetics and different biological markers and different types of technology that might enable early and accurate autism diagnosis, right? Early identification is extremely important. You'll see that in a moment when I show you the difference in the progress that younger children make when they're diagnosed earlier. We think a lot about the different behavioral intervention, both the ones that already exist in Israel, as is the case in Canada. Hundreds of millions of dollars are spent on different intervention programs annually. And there's actually not that much research about which forms of educational settings and interventions are most efficient. We think a lot about medical treatments and how different types of pharmacology and biological treatments might help. Parents today of children with autism are confronted with a variety of treatments that many of them have not been tested properly. So for example, there's a big hype in using medicinal cannabis. There's a lot of interest in hyperbaric chambers and all sorts of treatments that have actually not been tested well. And so we're trying to push that kind of research forward. And of course, get involved in clinical trials for new medication. And then there's the whole angle of transition into adulthood, independence, higher education, all of the programs that are relevant for later parts of life, which have also not been examined. And an integral theme of all of these questions is that any method or intervention or treatment that you can think of is likely to be effective in parts of the autism population, but definitely not on everyone. And a really critical question that really drives and gives us motivation for building a national center is that we're trying to understand what works for whom. And in order to do that, you really have to work on large populations, right? And I just want to emphasize this issue of heterogeneity, which is really a fundamental, in the beginning of autism research, this wasn't understood properly. And one of the things that's really emerged in the last decade is this understanding that autism is a whole host of symptoms, and people talk about the core symptoms, which are the ones that the diagnosis is based on, the social communication symptoms, right? Difficulties in eye contact and things like that. And there's also increased repetitive behaviors, but there's also a very large number of secondary symptoms that you see here around the circle that vary in terms of their severity in different individuals. And these secondary symptoms are often the most debilitating aspects of autism and can actually be the biggest troublemakers. And so in thinking about how to improve the quality of life of individuals with autism, we think a lot about this heterogeneity and what would work best for whom. So in order to do that kind of research, you need to work on very large cohorts. And another really important aspect is that you need to do things longitudinally. you need to stay in touch with the kids who develop autism and see how they progress and try and figure out who's improving and why. And in order to do that, what we've created in Israel, which is, this is really the unique thing in the way we work, is that we've created a clinical scientific collaboration, which turns out is pretty rare, not only in Israel, it's pretty rare around the world. And what happens is that clinical systems and academia are funded by different sources. And so there's a tendency to not get along together as much as we should. And so this is a really important aspect, and we're all very prominent advocates of this idea that in order to give good clinical services, you need to do research and figure out how to do them better. And in order to do good research, you need to understand what's happening in the clinic and make your research relevant to the actual problems that people face in real life. So this all actually started out a few years before we became the National Center. We called ourselves the Negev Autism Center then. You see some of the main figures here. You'll get to meet Gal and Chava and Idan in a few minutes. This is, of course, a group effort with a lot of other participants that I don't really have time to tell you about, but it's really important that we acknowledge. There are a lot of partners here and a very big team of research assistants and a clinical team who do a lot of assessments and things like that, computer admins, etc. So what I'd like to do now is show you a brief movie that gives a really good illustration about how we work together. And so it's very easy to say that we've created a clinical research collaboration. We have this nice animated film that tells you what that exactly means and how we do things. So here we go.
Over the last 2 years, scientists from Ben-Gurion University and physicians from Soroka Medical Center have been building the Negev Autism Center. This is the first center in Israel that combines community clinical care and autism research in the same location. Approximately 150 children with autism are diagnosed at Soroka Medical Center every year. The diagnosis of autism requires multiple visits in which clinicians interview the parents and directly assess the behavior of the child in order to determine whether an autism diagnosis is appropriate. By integrating the research into the diagnosis visits and later follow-up visits, scientists at BGU are able to collect a wide variety of data from a large number of children without requiring additional visits to the lab. This data includes detailed information about the child and family from the Soroka Electronic Patient Record System, behavioral information from voice and video recordings of the child during interactions with the clinical staff, parental questionnaires about sensory sensitivities and sleep habits, saliva samples for genetic testing, blood samples for metabolic testing, eye tracking while watching TV, and even EEG recordings during sleep. This research is unique and extremely rare on a global scale because it combines a wide variety of data from each of the children that are captured at the earliest stages of their development when autism symptoms are first emerging. Today, scientists around the world agree that autism is not one disorder, but rather a family of distinct disorders that are likely to have different causes. By combining multiple types of data, the interdisciplinary team at the Negev Autism Center hopes to identify these distinct subgroups of children and match each subgroup with the most efficacious targeted treatments. These qualities and goals make the Negev Autism Center the leader in translational autism research in Israel and the entire Middle East.
Okay, so as you can see, we're just updating this animation to go with the title of National Autism Center. And I hope you got the essence of the story where right? This collaboration allows us to collect a very large amount of information and follow the kids as part of the clinical development. And so the vision of that we have, as I told you, for the National Center is to implement this same way of working throughout the country in multiple places in order to drive research that targets particularly the diagnosis and treatment aspects. So the hallmark or the pillar that this effort is based on is a database, a shared database that has all of the extensive information that you heard about in the video. That's one of the things that we work on a lot. And then we develop projects that work with data that's available in the database to drive forward research on diagnosis and treatments and technological developments. And another thing that we do is we're very central in developing a scientific community in Israel. You'll see a couple of slides about that in a moment. And we hope that all of this information that is centered in this database will be used by decision makers in Israel. So one of our foremost goals is to bring the results of our research to decision makers in the health ministry and education ministry, and actually change policy in Israel in situations where that's relevant. This is what our data looks like. We've collected information from over 1,000 families so far. There are different parts to this data. We don't have to get too much into that. The main thing to take from this slide is that there's just a tremendous amount of information that enables dozens of research projects on a variety of angles. And what we'd like to do now is take you through a few, just to give you a very brief taste of what this allows us to do. I'll give you two examples and then we'll switch over. So one thing that I'm really proud of is our ability to track individual toddlers with autism in a longitudinal manner. So we assess their behavior during the diagnosis when they initially come to the clinic. That's usually around the age of 2 or 3 years of age on average. And then we measure them repeatedly a year or two after that. And what you see here is one of the main measures that we use. It's called the ADOS. This is a test of autism that gives you a sense of the severity of the autism in individual children. Every point in this image is a different child. And you see that the ADOS at diagnosis, which was the first time we saw the child, children have different severity levels. So the higher the score here, the worse the autism symptoms were at the diagnosis. And then a year later, when we see these kids again, you see that it changes. So children who fall below this diagonal line are improving in their autism symptoms, and children who fall above this line are deteriorating. Their autism is getting worse. And this is a really, really important piece of information, right? Because we really want to know, why are some of these kids improving and others are deteriorating? What did they receive some kind of treatment? Was it something in their genetics? Was it something in their diet, in something that, something inherent in their biology? And so one thing that we can say already is that one issue that has a huge impact on how well children improve is what age they were diagnosed at. So you see that the kids who were diagnosed before the age of 2.5, many more of them are below the line in comparison to the children who were diagnosed after the age of 2.5. And so this really drives home this point that early diagnosis is incredibly important. And so I think this is the first time that this has been shown in Israel in such a manner. And of course, we want to know why and what are these children receiving. I'll just mention very briefly that we do a lot of research with technology. We videotape, we record the kids during their assessments. Here you see my 5-year-old daughter who's in the control group. This is an example of her. You can see that we can track her body movements. This is one form of technology that might allow us to look at repetitive movements of children and measure how severe they are. We can also see where she's looking at and measure the amount of eye contact that she's making. We do a lot of analysis of speech, of sleep, of other factors. And we also have a whole other area of research that has to do with neuroimaging, looking at MRI scans. It turns out that about a quarter of the kids with autism in Israel undergo MRI scanning. There are a lot of interesting things you could look at in terms of brain development. And so we're pursuing those angles as well. So those were my 2 examples. And now I'll give Idan Menashe the floor. Idan is the geneticist and epidemiologist of the group. And please, Idan.
Thank you, Ilan. So hello to everyone. So as Ilan said and Connie said, I'm a genetic epidemiologist, and my research focuses on the genetic and environmental causes of autism. So I'll try to give you an example for each one of these. So in the next slide. So when we talk about the environmental causes of autism, we focus on the pregnancy and birth period, because we know these periods are critical for brain development and possibly also for autism development. For that, we take advantage of the fact that about 90% of the children in our center were born in Soroka Hospital, where girls work, and that allows us to access to their complete medical records, including the birth records and pregnancy records of their mothers. This allows us to create a unique database of possibly environmental risk factors for autism that we can examine and try to assess their association to the risk of autism. So next, I'll show you one interesting association that we found. There were a couple of previous studies that suggested that birth in cesarean section is associated with risk of autism. And this is something we also saw in our data. As you can see here, you see that there is a much higher rate of autism cases in those that were born in cesarean section compared to vaginal delivery. And this means that there is a more or less 40% increased risk of autism if you are born in cesarean section compared to the vaginal delivery. We were curious about this type of association and try to explain it by using the data that we have. So first of all, we thought it might be related to the type of anesthesia that doctors are using while they are operating the mothers. And then for that, we divided our sample to cesarean section that were using regional anesthesia and cesarean section that were using general anesthesia. As you can see in this slide, you see that the association between cesarean section and autism is seen only amongst those that were using the general anesthesia. We further try to explain, to ask whether this is actually the general anesthesia or whether it related to other risk factors, other indication for the surgery that are leading for cesarean section with general anesthesia, and we didn't see any difference. So we concluded from this study that the using of general anesthesia in cesarean section is possibly the contribute to the association between autism and cesarean section. So this is just one example of what we can do with this type of data, and now we will move to the genetic. So I'm also interested in the genetic causes of autism. We know that genetics factors plays a significant role in the risk of autism, but it's very complicated to actually identify these genetic factors because, as you know, each child with autism is unique. It's very different from all other children. And this is the same for their genetics. They also have a unique genetic profiles. And also the different genetic causes of autism are unique in the sense that almost every child has a different genetic cause of autism. And this makes the identification of genetic causes very difficult. So in order to identify these genetic causes, we are part of the largest genetic collaboration, international genetic collaboration called the Autism Sequencing Consortium. It involved dozens of different groups around the world that sends the DNA sample to the United States for sequencing, and then analyzing together the sequencing in order to identify the genetic causes of autism. I'll show you two different examples of the genetic causes of autism that we think we found in our sample. So at the moment we analyzed data from 121 children and their parents. And among them, we identified 20 suspicious mutation in 21 of them. This is, on the left, you can see one example of this kind of mutation. So the type of mutation we are looking have the following characteristics. First, they need to change dramatically the function of the gene, or even damage the gene at all. And second of all, these mutations need to be unique in these children and not appear in their parents. So we're using these two characteristics to identify the mutation that could underlie autism in these children. So here you can see a gene called the CHD8 gene, which is one of the prominent genes related to autism. And we found a mutation, what we call it a de novo mutation, a mutation that happens in the child DNA, and doesn't exist in their parents, in his parents. So it's unique to the child, and we know, and since you can see, it actually break the gene. It stops the translation of the gene into a protein. So it definitely damaged the function of the gene. So it has these two characteristics, and in a very prominent gene of autism. So we think that in this child, this is possibly the cause of autism. In another example, a very interesting example, we saw in another gene called SYNGAP1. We found a mutation that appeared in one child, and in both copies of the DNA, where in his parents, we found this kind of mutation only in one copy. So there was like a half mutation in each of these parents and a complete mutation in this child. What is interesting in this family, that after we identified this kind of mutation, we saw that we have also a brother, his brother in our database, and we sent the DNA of the brother to sequencing. And when we got the result, we found out that he has exactly the same mutation that his previous brother has. So these two children has exactly the same mutation that is different from their parents, and is obviously damaging the protein, and therefore we think that this is the cause of autism in this family. So the final question is what we can do with these type of findings, both the environmental causes and the genetic causes. One thing that we can do is try to ask what is the molecular mechanism that link between these variations, these risk factors, and autism. And this is something that what Chava is doing in her lab, and so I'll give the table to Chava. Chava, we can't hear you.
Sorry. Hi. So as Dan said, each of us have a different genome, so it's a different composition of genes. And it's the same for the children with or patients with autism. Some of them carry a single gene that is mutated, and some of them we know. And the way to utilize the similarity in molecular mechanisms and the cellular level small circuit level between the animal kingdom is to utilize animal models to study what are the biological molecular changes that undergo in the brain or in neurons when someone have a specific mutation. So in this context, we use a mice model. In this case, we can see here the mice are exploring freely each other. It's kind of a free social interaction between them. And during this event, they also communicate vocally. We can see at the bottom of this slide the type of calls that they emit. So these mice, some of them have a single change in one gene, and we try to characterize behaviors which are relevant to autism. So they are not autistic, but they have autistic features, and we'll try to characterize different types of social interaction like we see here. And in the next slide, we can see a different type of test that is more structured, that enable us to see the preference of the mouse to see to explore a mouse, as we see in one side of the arena or an empty box. And when we analyze this data later on and we see the projection of the path that they actually explore, we can see if the mouse prefer a novel mouse versus a familiar mouse, or in the case that is shown here, explore the empty compartment or the mouse compartment. So these are types of social behaviors, and in general we use some of these, and some of the tests that are helping us to characterize a repetitive behavior, features related to memory, anxiety, preference to a single object or some interest. So using this variety of tests at different ages, we'll see in the next slide that we can see in mice that were modified just by a single gene. In this case, is the MTHFR gene. It's a gene that is very critical for utilization of folic acid for the metabolism that is actually prepare different metabolites from folic acid. And we can see in this mice model that the in utero environment, the maternal genotype that inducing the availability of metabolites for the fetus, and both the PAP or the offspring genotype are very critical. And we, in about 50 to 60% of the mice that carry this gene, we see a developmental delay and features that are related to a deficiency in core symptoms of autism. So it's what we call autistic-like behavior. They are not autistic, but they serve us to test first for biomarkers and understand the molecular mechanism that is impaired in these mice, which will allow us to develop intervention that is particular and they can be benefited from her. So it may be not useful for autistic patients that don't suffer from impairment in the metabolism of folic acid, but those that do suffer from it, we can reduce the rates, at least in animals now, and the next move is to see who may benefit from it in human. And check the safety and the efficiency of the intervention in the mice and later on translate it to human. So in the looking for the very early age, mice at the age of 7 days only, we already can see that when we separate the pup from the mother, he use a different repertoire of calls, represented here by the different colors of the calls at the bottom of the slide. The wild type is the normal one. And the one that the deficiency, we can see that in 50% of the cases, he used the same pink type of call, which is a monotonous and very, very short call and very simple. So the subject of our research is right now is to see how predictive are these early changes to autistic-like behavior in the adulthood, and see first of all, what are the biomarkers that are associated with this impairment, and in addition, test beneficial diets in this case, and see how they attenuate the neuronal changes, the biological markers, and the behavior, of course. So the next step is to move into looking for these people that may benefit from it in our cohort, and we're in the way to help them. So it will be something that is fitting a particular population, what we call nutrigenomic intervention, dedicated for a particular population that may represent me, but maybe not other autistic patients. So with this, I give the floor back to Ilan.
Thanks, Chava. So I hope you got a sense for just a few tastes of the kind of research that we do. In a moment, we'll move on to the clinical sides, and you'll get to meet Gal, who is the clinical director of the center. I just wanted to mention that this kind of research and developing the database that allows the genetics and molecular and behavioral research that you've just been exposed to, we're now expanding all of this research nationally. We're already operating not only in 3 different locations in Be'er Sheva, but also in Asaf HaRofeh, together with Professor Dita Tzachor, who runs the Alut Autism Center. Alut is the biggest national autism service provider in Israel, and also with Dr. Michal Begin in Jerusalem. So we're really trying to expand this to multiple sites so that the information that is gathered can be used by multiple researchers, not just at BGU, but also in other universities and other medical centers. As you can imagine, this requires lots of politics. And I just wanted to mention that getting all of the HMOs and the universities and the government ministries and the autism providers, and most importantly, the families, requires building a community. And that's one thing that we're really putting a lot of effort into. You can see here some images from the last autism conference that we had in February, just before, a week before the COVID pandemic hit Israel. We were very lucky to hold this conference. You can see Connie here with us, who was an amazing guest and gave a great lecture. And so we're investing a lot of their adults with autism who are part of this effort. Lots of families, lots of parents. Right, we're really trying to create an inclusive community with all of the stakeholders that are relevant to drive this agenda of developing, of doing research on services and treatments and diagnosis. So, so now I'm going to hand over the floor to Gal, who will tell you a bit about what happened in the COVID epidemic in Israel, and particularly about how he spearheaded a lot of the response to this story as part of the center. So Gal, please.
Thank you, Ilan. Good afternoon, good evening to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm actually representing with my 2 hats, the research and clinician as the head of the preschool psychiatric unit and as the clinical director of the center. And actually, these 2 bodies are actually combined together in the reality. In Israel, when Corona started, there was actually a rapid closure of all the public services during the first 2 weeks of March. We were instructed to continue to go to work because I'm working in a general hospital, but not to see patients. And the entire education system was shut down from mid-March to mid-May, and these days it's kind of getting back to normal. Actually, the economical impact is really very large, and we're still kind of trying to understand what would be the results. And we have like a quarter of the population now that is not working. Next slide, please. So all the children with ASD were sent home, the one in the special education and the one that are included in the general education system. The situation was very complicated for the individuals with ASD that lives in institutions homes, because they were kept isolated and families were not allowed to come to visit. And this was also very stressing for those individuals and for the parents and the families. And then they started to really rapidly develop a way to help those parents and families at home, and giving them an online virtual support with at least 3 hours of video conferencing per week. So the parent could be given an instructions of a speech therapist, occupational therapist, physiotherapist, ABA therapist, and they were actually continue the same programs that they had in the kindergarten with the child and the parent at home. And also a lot of material was sent through the social networks. Next, please. A few words about Soroka and my unit. Soroka is actually the biggest and the only hospital at the Negev, which gives us a great opportunity for research. My professional unit, the preschool psychiatric unit, is actually the only service with this title in the district. We have an interdisciplinary team. We see many patients, but we see a lot of patients that are referred due to suspected autism. We serve the population of 1 million and a specific population of the Bedouin, which is very unique culturally and genetically. And we do see, as Ilan was saying, about 150 to 200 new cases of ASD every year. So, as you can see on the pictures, this is me sitting with this one back there in a big room. This is not my regular room because we were instructed to see only urgent cases, and this was really a kind of a clinical question, because it seems you can see judge it by yourself because you're clinical. So for me as a clinician, that my first motivation is for the children and for the parents. When I hear on the phone a very stressed mother that's saying, I don't know what is wrong with my child, and the diagnostic procedure stopped due to the corona, and I'm crying at home, for me this is an urgent medical care. And and then I invited those parents, and I did continue to see those urgent cases, and there was some others, but I don't have the time to talk about all of them. So we had instructions to see them in a big space. This is one of our meeting rooms, to keep distance, to protect ourselves and the patients, to clean all the toys. So that's how we were able to continue some of the clinical effort. And we did communicate with patients with phone and video conferences. And the general work, kind of the flow of the work, actually almost stopped of patients that are coming regularly, but we were trying to keep touch with the patients with those measures of the phone and video. Now we are returning back to normal. We still have some limitations, but generally we are getting back to the normal pace of diagnosis and clinical follow-ups. Next, please. So one of the initiative of the center, actually the research center, was to create a new website for the families with videos and tips about challenges that are likely to come up at home, as you can see. So this was a nice combined effort of the clinicians from my unit and the speech therapist from the research team. This was a lot of professional effort, and they recorded a very short, very professional and short, accessible videos with all of these subjects that you did see in the table. this was really, and some of them were translated to Arabic, so that we will be also accessible to our Arabic Bedouin population, and the parents could choose for any subject, and we were able to see that this was very popular at the time that we published it, and many parents did use and access our Facebook and website at that time. Next, please. So that's one of the examples of the website and what parents could see. Some examples from the conference, videos from the conference, lectures from the conference, and material also from those professional short clips. Another service that we opened was a hotline. We actually gave access to parents that were able to call, and the clinicians from the research team and from the clinical team answered the phone calls for parents that wanted some immediate advice about urgent situations at home, consulting about their kids' issues or siblings' issues, and or wanted some clinical advice. Next, please. So now we are getting back to business. Limitations are rapidly kind of fading away, and we are going to back to normal. We are not sure that if this is really going to be normal. We are facing new challenges now. Some of the kids, especially those that are verbal, are asking, is it safe now? Can we go outside? Will it come back? And we don't always have the good answers. We are still instructed to use the mask if we are close to our patients. So it's, of course, problematic to do that if you want to, the child will understand your nonverbal communication, or he can see your lips and face and understand your language better. So we are still having this challenge of how to do it. And there is still some confusion and anxiety among the children and among the parents that we also had to give some answer to that. Please, Ilan. So I'll give the floor back to Ilan to show some of our findings of a new research that actually were just recently done. Please, Ilan.
Thanks, Scott. So we'll finish off with a research project that we've gotten underway pretty quickly. We got an online questionnaire together where we asked families with young children with autism about their experience during the closure. And about, it's now almost 300 families who have answered this questionnaire. And the results are pretty surprising. It seems that in many cases, the COVID pandemic actually created some situations that were even beneficial for families. And so I wanted to start out with an example that shows you the very large differences across families with children with autism when we asked them how did the atmosphere at home change during the closure. And you can see that many families said that it didn't do anything, that the atmosphere remained the same, and gave it a score of 5. Some of the families said that the atmosphere was very difficult and deteriorated during the period, but actually quite a few said that it got better and that there were improvements in their homes. And so what we're doing now is we're looking at different aspects of this. We asked them also to score how the pandemic affected their children. So you see here several measures of overall mood, anxiety, tantrums. You can see that there are differences. We can split this up in a variety of ways. One way is according to the severity of the autism.
Ilan,
And yes.
1 or 2 minutes because we have a ton of questions.
Sure. So I'm just wrapping up.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So you can see that that as far as the individual children, the behavior of some of the kids, especially the more severe cases, did tend to deteriorate. Atmosphere at home and relationships with partner and things involving the parents and their relationship with the children actually tended to get better during the COVID epidemic. So results of this will be upcoming, and I just wanted to end with an invitation to follow us online, both on our website. This is the English version. If you speak Hebrew, there's also a useful Facebook page and a website in Hebrew. So I think we'll end the presentation now and move into the discussion portion. Before that, I'll just say thank you to everyone, to Mark and Simon and Zach and David Burson for getting all this together, and a special thanks for Connie for participating.
Thank you very
Simon.
much. Yes, thank you
The
very
screen
much.
is yours.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much, Ilan and the team. Just to make sure, we had one comment asking us about the videos that Gal was referring to. Those are available on your screen, on your website?
Yes, on the Hebrew version of the website.
Very good. Okay, great. Thank you. First question from Mrs. Myrna Yeazer in Halifax, Nova Scotia. As a child with autism grows up, do the symptoms lessen or get stronger? And does that depend on where on the autism spectrum a child sits?
Gal?
Yeah, well, that's a difficult question. And I would say that generally we see improvement all the time. The majority of the improvement is in the younger age, which is also goes with brain plasticity, which is better in the younger age. But we can see that plasticity exists even in when the child grows up. We see for those children with a more high functioning autism, we see even more improvement during adolescence. But we cannot, this is one of the things that we want to do in our research, is really to do a very long follow-up studies, because there are not enough studies like that in the world, and to try to see and to predict which children will improve better, or what should we do better in order to help those children to improve. So this is one of our goals, actually, of our research group. Generally, I would say everybody improves. Some get worse because if you have a child with comorbidity like severe autism and severe intellectual disability, sometimes when a child has an outburst when he's 2 years old, this is one thing. But if he's 15 years old, that's another issue. So it's not like the real deterioration, but it's just the impact of an outburst in those different ages is very different. But I would say, as a clinician, that most of the children will improve during the years.
Great, thank you. Question for Idan from your presentation from Daniel Goldowitz. There's a question, the question arises if the gestational period was similar between the vaginal delivery and the C-section cohorts. And on your slide number 11, it's striking relative to point out that early diagnosis is important in terms of outcomes. Lots of questions in this regard, but the first one is whether the specific age at which diagnosis is made would recommend one series of interventions versus different sets of interventions at other stages of diagnosis.
Simon, those were two different questions.
Oh, sorry, you're right.
I think Idan will answer the first one.
Right, sorry.
So the short answer to your question is that I do not remember exactly. I think they were the same. But anyway, we adjusted. We accounted for differences between the groups. in a specific statistical model. So these type of differences, if they existed, not affected the results.
Okay. Should I repeat the second question?
So yeah, briefly.
Okay. The slide 11 is striking relative to the point that early diagnosis is important in terms of outcomes. And lots of questions in this regard, but the first one is whether the specific age at which diagnosis is made would recommend one series of interventions versus different sets of interventions at other times of diagnosis.
So that's the million-dollar question. That's really the motivating factor for building this autism center and doing all of this research. And we're starting to parse things out. Gal and I just met today with a PhD student who is examining, for example, a comparison between children who are sent to mainstream education in Israel versus special education settings. And we're actually seeing that does not seem to make much of a difference overall in terms of how well they progress over the first couple of years of life. But there are many other questions that this is a very complicated question, right? Because it's not enough to know whether they're in a mainstream school or a special education school. We need to know how much therapy each child is receiving, how much therapy are they getting at home, how much, even inside a mainstream school, they can receive different amounts of therapies from different people and different types of interventions. So this is, we're really going to devote the next couple of years to looking at exactly those questions.
Great, thank you. Question for you, Ilan, in your presentation about COVID, during the COVID crisis from Gourit Lotan in Montreal, why do you think in some cases the situation at home did improve? Could it be that parents acquired skills at managing children at home?
Yes, that's one of the big responses we get from families is when we ask them about how well do they feel as a parent in terms of their ability, their parental abilities. There seems to be a lot of improvement in positive responses on that domain. It's again a complicated answer because some of the families have undergone financial crises. I assume that as we dive deeper into this, we're going to find subgroups who respond differently. And Gal, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add my clinical impression. This goes along also with that because when I'm making phone calls and video conferences with parents at home, many of them will say that. They will say, I actually feel like I know my child better now, and with the help that I got with professional people, I can help him progress in a better way. So for some of the children and some of the families, this was a really a good bonding time and a good time to feel that they can help their kids to progress. This was very interesting and very encouraging to see that. And research will try to see if this is only a clinical impression or is it really also as a kind of a general impression from big numbers that we can hear in research.
Simon, last question, please. And I think I just want to add that what we will do is we will send the remaining questions on to Ilan and his team, and they can send us the answers, and we can then send them to the people who have asked them because we will never be able to get to the remaining 10 questions that we have. We only have 2-3 minutes.
Great, thank you. So there's a question relating to treatment and improving. How does your research in treatment emphasize experimenting with new drugs? Are there other treatments that you can discuss here?
So the main avenue that we've been looking at so far is medicinal cannabis. Gal was already part of one study. We're also collaborating with another hospital in that respect with Asaf HaRofeh. So I can talk about medicinal cannabis. There are other types of interventions, of medical interventions that are being tested in other places in the world. Right now, this is our main emphasis because in Israel, medicinal cannabis is very popular among parents of kids with autism. Many of them ask for a prescription for that. It seems to be doing doing a good job in cases where children are more with aberrant behaviors, with tantrums, and maybe with problems with sleeping. One of the big issues, though, is that it hasn't been tested carefully in terms of identifying the right dosages and exact types of cannabis that should be used clinically. And so we're trying to do to help with on those lines.
Elon and team Dinstein, team Autism. I don't know what to call you. Team BGU.
This is a shared. This is a really shared effort.
It really is,
Thank you,
and
Mark.
I have to, having experienced your team now for 2, 3, 4 years, I can attest to the fact that you are just outstanding researchers and individuals, and working and accomplishing groundbreaking findings and data for research and to help families with children with autism. If I would use a sports metaphor, since sports seems to slowly be creeping out, I saw that they had the first soccer game in front of 0 people the other day. This was a home run, or it was a hole-in-one if you use a golf metaphor, or a touchdown if you use an American football metaphor, or a pendel if you use a soccer metaphor. Anyone listening who would like to support this outstanding research or any other cutting-edge research being done at Ben-Gurion, please speak with your regional directors, Simon Ben-Simon in Montreal, Shimi Wenner in Toronto, Zach Ostrov in Winnipeg, and David Bursting, in Vancouver, or of course to me. And you can go directly to our site, www.bengurion.ca, where you can also donate directly. Please join us in 2 weeks for our next webinar Wednesday on June 3rd, which we are calling the Rebooting the Startup Nation, featuring the CEO of BGN Technologies, that's Ben-Gurion Negev Technologies, the tech transfer company of Ben-Gurion, who will be appearing along with Dana Gavish, the Vice President of Entrepreneurship there. Another unique venture of our university, helping student brilliance and startup ideas come to fruition and bring them to market. Again, thank you so much to Team BGU Autism. And we know it's 8 o'clock at night. You've had a long day. Thanks to everyone who's helped this become an outstanding webinar in our series. And as I said, to those who ask questions, I promise that we will send them to the team and we will get the answers and send them out to the askers. Everyone stay safe, wear masks. We are not out of the lockdown like in Israel. We have to wear masks, we have to wash our hands, and we have to be careful how we cough. Stay safe and have a great day and week. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very
Thank you all.
much. Thanks for
Bye-bye.
inviting me. Bye.
Thanks, Connie.
Bye.
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 Terrific, Connie.
Bye. Thanks.